Welcome back to Professional Perspectives. I'm Arvakela, joined by my co-host Praneeth Vimuri. Today, we're discussing one of the biggest changes happening in youth sports today: name, image, and likeness, better known as NIL. While many people associate NIL with college athletics, its impact has expanded into high schools, creating new opportunities, new challenges, and plenty of confusion for athletes and their families. Our guest today has dedicated himself to helping student athletes navigate this changing landscape with clarity, responsibility, and a long-term mindset.
Joining us today is Dr. John. Dr. John is a former SEC football player, a 13-year professional football veteran, educator, author, and nationally recognized speaker who worked with schools, athletic departments, coaches, parents, and student athletes on NIL education, recruiting, and the transfer portal, athlete development, and even well-being. He's also the author of the High School NIL Reality Guide, a resource designed to help families understand the realities of NIL before making decisions that could impact recruiting opportunities or athletic eligibility.
What stands out most about Dr. John's work is his focus on education over the hype. While headlines often emphasize big NIL deals and viral success stories, he encourages athletes to prioritize preparation, character, informed decision-making, and long-term development. Dr. John, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a pleasure to have you on Professional Perspectives.
I appreciate it, you guys. This is a message I think is really important to get out there because there's a lot of confusion and misinformation out there.
Yeah, 100%. And so before becoming an educator and NIL advocate, you spent over a decade playing professional football. Looking back, what lessons from your playing career shaped who you are today and what you advocate for other athletes?
Ironically, it goes back to high school because I didn't even start until I was a senior in high school and realized how much work it took in preparation to actually get to that point. And then we ended up winning the state championship game. And that was the best game I ever played because I didn't think I was ever going to play again. And then I carried that over into when I went to Vanderbilt, I walked onto the team. So I got in academically. And then I used the same work ethic I did to start in high school to earn a scholarship after the first semester. So the sacrifice you have to make to being the very best that you can be is something that nowadays I feel like a lot of the kids are missing because they just want to be successful and not really realize that there's a lot of work before you're successful. And so then obviously going on and playing professionally. And one of the things I learned from that is when you get to a point when you've been playing for so long, you've identified yourself basically as I am an athlete. When that goes away, you're kind of lost because you don't know what you are because you've always had coaches telling you what to do, what to eat, how to work out, and all that stuff. And that just goes away. And I know a lot of players struggle with that. And so that's another thing, especially young guys don't want to think about it because you guys think you're indestructible, which is fine. But that is something that I think kids need to keep in mind. No disrespect saying kids, by the way, but you need to keep in mind that, you need to have a plan for after sports. That way you can get into the job world and have something prepared mentally to be able to get into.
Yeah, and it's awesome to hear that you were able to get a scholarship from Vanderbilt after the first semester. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
my parents said, you have to get a scholarship or we're not going to be able to afford it. I was like, okay.
That's amazing. Uh, but yeah, so talking more about your career, what motivated you to dedicate your work specifically to helping high school students or high school athletes instead of like focusing solely on like college or professional athletes?
That was interesting too, because the college NIL started in 2021, and then it was so confusing because when I played, you weren't allowed to do anything. You couldn't even go to a fan's house for dinner or anything because it was against the rules. And even the transfer portal was different. If you transferred, you had to sit out an entire year. So NIL made everything totally different. And it started to trickle down into the high school level after a few years. And so I knew if I didn't understand it, then the kids definitely did not understand it. And the parents especially. And the tricky part is that it's different for every state. There's 4 levels of restrictive rules as far as each association for each state looks at NIL, and it makes it very confusing. And so I have focused on, what are the basic 4 types, like I said, and, what states fit in. I was on a Booster Hub podcast a few months ago, and the host thought there was only NIL in 7 states. And I was like, it's like 47 states, and she had no idea, and that just shows the misinformation that's out there and the confusion.
Yeah, and I think another big one is people just assume that NIL is only just getting paid to play.
Mhm.
What's another big misconception you say surrounding NIL today?
Well, in high school, you can't do pay to play. It's against the rules in every state. So it's one of those things where if there's another school and they're offering you money, saying, "Hey, we have a guy or a business that's willing to offer you this money, or we have our boosters will help support you financially if you'll come play at our school," they can't do that, and so it's not a pay to play. It's kind of in college. It's a rev share. The school shares some of the income from the ticket sales and stuff with the athletes, but you don't have that in high school, and that gets confusing for the schools, for the ads, for the coach, or for the coaches, the booster clubs, because they all want to help. Especially, there's so many horror stories because of the confusion. Like there was a kid at one school, and I was talking to his mom, and he was doing really well on the soccer team, and they featured him in one of their promotional, the school did, on one of their promotional social media posts or something, and it had his jersey on there talking about how he plays here and so you should too, but they didn't ask the parents if they could do that, and so you can't do that, and they aren't aware of what they can and can't do.
Yeah, that is really interesting. But I just to like go back a few steps,
Yeah.
I briefly mentioned it in the start, but for someone who has never heard the term NIL, right? For
Mhm.
someone hearing the term for the first time, what would your definition of NIL mean, and like what are the basic intricacies of it?
So NIL, as you said before, is name, image, and likeness. That means that there's value associated with a player's name, their picture, and anything that resembles them. And it's something that has to be protected because as a student athlete, social media is huge, obviously, and they cannot. There's most of the states you can't post anything that has the school logo visible. You can't. You have to be careful about what comments you make on YouTube posts and things like that because it shows your character. And if college recruiters are looking at different posts and your character is a little questionable because you get on a fight in a comment section on YouTube or something, then they don't have time to mess with trying to figure it out. They'll just move on to the next player. And it's something that a lot of kids don't understand. They just think, oh, this guy wants me to, do a couple of posts and tag him and I'm going to get money for it. And it's like, okay. I always talk about like a local pizza place. They're like, oh, if you tag us, you get free pizza. So you don't think it's that big a deal. But the rules say that if anything of value is exchanged for if you mention them or something like that, some sort of deliverable, then that's considered an NIL deal. And you need to get everything in writing. And the biggest thing for me is with NIL contracts and parents and student athletes is whenever an offer comes along, it comes back to the whole story of success is when preparation meets opportunity. And so I focus on the preparation part so that even if there's a kid in like a freshman or sophomore that really doesn't have a lot of any attention or may not even start or anything, I have to get them mentally prepared for when if an opportunity does come up, then they know not to just jump at it because it has a dollar figure on it. You have to sit back and be like, okay, if this deal is available today, and usually it's less than $1,000, if it's here today, it's going to be there tomorrow. So you need to sleep on it. You need to actually read the contract, see what they're asking for, and then if it fits with what your long-term goals are, then yeah, that's a safe way to go. I'm not a legal expert or an accountant or anything like that. I'll leave that to the professionals. I just really break it down to just the basics of how to make a long-term decision that's going to fit with you, which when you're older, like a senior, and there's colleges offering you NIL money, you also need to make sure that's when it really comes down to, is it a good fit? Is that particular scheme at that school something that I'm used to playing? That the coach, is it a coach that I like? Is there a lot of competition for my position at that school? And you have to really think about that. And in the misinformation out there on social media, talking about all this, oh, he's making millions of dollars. It's You never can trust what's on social media because somebody can say whatever they want, especially in high school because none of the contracts are public. so you don't know exactly what's going on. They have said that their best guess is there's over 1,000 high school NIL deals every year. And so that's when I tell kids, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot more out there than you realize. You just have to be really prepared and careful about what you do.
Yeah, and it really sounds like this whole NIL landscape is changing very heavily. And you did talk about it a little about how the transfer portal also changed in recruiting. How'd you say it changed for today's high school athletes?
For the high school athletes, this is kind of crazy. In Florida last year, there were 7,000 transfers. The average number of transfers was four. So each player had transferred at least four times in 4 years. One athlete had transferred 8 times in 4 years. So that's transferring twice a school year. And they do it because it's like, okay, well, if it's football, then I need to be at this school. But if it's going to go into baseball season, I need to be at a different school. And if it's going to be soccer, I need to go to another school to make sure they're optimizing their options later on in college. But the only basic safest way to transfer is if there's some sort of hardship, and the schools will and the state will actually look at it as, okay, well, this individual, their parents had to move to a different state or a different school area because of some sort of financial hardship. Dad lost his job or he got a different job, and so they had to go there. It can't be, well, I just want to go to another school because I think I have a better shot at starting. And that's what happened in Florida. I think they don't regulate it as much there as far as the transfers. California is the same way, and so you just have to be really careful. The thing that I don't like about that is that the kids, when you have an athletic team, you kind of, it's almost like you're a family, and you, especially when you're younger, you're getting to know guys, you get to be friends, you grow up in the same school and the same sport team, and it builds a culture around it where you guys feel like family and you can look out for each other. But if they're transferring all the time, it's going to be guys you don't even know. It's going to be a lot of strangers coming on the team, and that's actually hurting ticket sales too for the schools, because all the people, families that live in the local area, come to the schools and they don't know half the players because they transferred in from somewhere else. And so that's another thing that schools need to look out for, because it's hurting their income from the games.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about how in Florida there was like a huge surge in transfers, right? Do you think
Yep.
that today's recruiting process is more competitive than it was like 10 to 15 years ago? And how do you think it's going to compare for the next 10 to 15 years?
Are you talking about college recruiting for high school athletes?
Yes.
So that's the biggest thing. So back in the day, 20, oh Lord, I'm old, long time ago, um, you all only had to compete for a certain number of roster spots in college. And there was 7% of high school kids played either Division I, Division II, NAIA, that's a mouthful, junior college, those kind of things. Only 7% of high school kids did that. Only 2% actually played at a Division I school. But all those numbers are lower now because they're not just competing with other high school athletes, they're competing against already proven college athletes. And that makes sense from the college coaches' perspective, because you've got a whole pool of players that are more developed. They've already shown they can play at the college level, so it would just make sense to rather get one of those guys to come play for you than to take a bet on a high school kid that you don't know if he is going to be able to handle it in college or not. And so that's made it much more competitive. And it's something, once again, goes back to, you need to make sure that you are being very responsible in what you're doing in social media, because they can go back 10 years and see, well, what were you posting 10 years ago? And I don't care if you were 8. We have to make sure that it shows that you have good character, that you're a nice person, and that you're serious about what you're doing and about being an athlete. Because if there's any question at all, and any of those questionable deals, like the handshake deal at the gym to get free gear or whatever, then they're just going to move on to the next player. So the transfer portal in college is definitely having a huge effect on recruiting in high school.
Yeah, and I think it's really good, especially like how you touched on the online presence and stuff. I feel like that's a huge thing that students like sometimes overlook. And so it's really good, I feel like, in my opinion, that you're like emphasizing that. And also you do emphasize a lot of decision making. What are some red flags that families should be looking out for before signing an NIL agreement?
One of the biggest red flags is, first of all, to read the contract, but you need to see what the deliverables are, what they're asking you to do, and if it's realistic. Because if somebody says, okay, if you'll post 40 videos a week and talk about us, then we'll pay you $100, $200, or whatever. And you might be excited at the start because you're like, oh, I just have to post. I'm posting all the time anyway. Sure, I'll post and mention them. But then that darn school comes into play, and you have to like study and things like that. And you have to practice for whatever sport you're playing. And you realize that's not something realistic for you to do. And so that's one of the biggest ones. You've got to look at the deliverables and make sure that it's something that's realistic. And then also, I'm old. I lost my train of thought. Oh, you have to look at the length of the contract. If it is something that, say, you're a senior or a junior and the contract goes for 10 years, well, that's going to go into your college playing time. And if there's a non-compete clause in that contract, so say you have a contract with a gym, like we were mentioning before, you go off to college and you have an even bigger deal offered to you from another gym. Well, technically, based on the first contract, you can't take that second one, even though it's a lot more money, because you already signed an exclusivity clause and non-compete clause. So it makes it tricky. And one of the tricky things in college, I was just talking to an attorney the other day, they have buyout clauses. So if seniors are going into college and there's a buyout clause in that NIL deal, and then that kid decides he wants to go play for another team and jumps into the transfer portal in college, well, it could be stipulated in that NIL contract that as soon as he goes into the transfer portal, he loses that deal automatically if he gets picked up by another school or not. And so he goes into that. They say there's no more contract. And even worse than that, they have to pay back a certain amount of money back to that brand because they violated the contract. So there was an example of, say, there was a guy that had a $10 million deal. He got $2 million up front. He goes into the transfer portal and they're like, oh, no. You have to buy us out. So you have to come up with another $5 million to get out of this deal. And I mean, I guarantee you, he gets $2 million up front. It's not like you're going to save it. He's going to be out there buying all kinds of stuff and he's not going to have the money to be able to buy it out. And that's going to get him into a legal battle with that business.
Yeah, and I think so far based on our conversation, like one main takeaway that I got is like you should be really aware of what you're doing and you should kind of be able to think ahead and think far ahead, right?
Yeah.
So in the perspective of like a school, right? How can athletic directors in schools, how do you think that they can better educate families about these issues before they arise or before like they evolve into like the legal battles you were just mentioning?
Right. Well, one of the best things is education, because I go into schools and I talk to parents, I talk to players, coaches, athletic directors, booster clubs to kind of walk them through for their particular state. Be like, okay, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, and here's some kind of gray area in the middle. So I wouldn't do this either, because with public schools, there's something called Title IX. And what that says is that if you focus more on one particular sport, one particular player, that it can actually put your federal funding at risk. And so if they don't understand how it works, obviously the players and parents aren't going to understand it. And if it gets their funding for the school in jeopardy, then that's even more important that they understand it. And the tricky part is with parents, all the AEDs I've talked to, well, yeah, pretty much all of them have said parents are the biggest challenge because they get very competitive. Their ego gets involved. And so say their son doesn't have an NIL deal, but his friend down the street does. And so then they go to the coach and they're like, hey, this guy's got an NIL deal. Why doesn't my son have one? You need to get him one. And the coach feels that pressure and he's not sure what to do. And so if he tries to initiate and make any connections for that player to get an NIL deal, that's against the rules too. He can't do that. Now, in situations like that, the only way the association could find out, that state's high school sports association finds out, is if another school finds out about it and they report that coach to the association, and then that can get everybody in trouble. So it's just educating everybody that I can to make sure everybody is calm, not rushing into things, just looking at the numbers and making sure that coaches understand. You get the old school coaches that just have their head in the sand and are just like, you know what, it's old school football. I don't have to worry about this NIL stuff. And it's like, well, you need to be prepared because you don't know. You might suddenly have a superstar on the team and he's not gonna know what to do, and he's gonna look to you. And if you don't know the answer, you have to be comfortable enough to be like, you know what, I don't know the specific answer to that. So I'll get back to you, and he'll either talk to the athletic director or the principal, somebody to get the proper information. I mean, I'm also available, of course, and I do online stuff like this all the time. But it's just having a good baseline to start with, and that way there's not nearly as much confusion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point actually, like for schools themselves to just always be ready for something like this to come up. And a term that you used a little while ago was like booster clubs, and I know those are also part of like the schools. What role do they play in the NIL environment, and like what are they exactly for listeners who aren't fully aware?
So a booster club is usually a group of families or parents. It's kind of like a PTA kind of thing, but it's also businesses that get together and boost the school programs, and they can contribute money for equipment or like venues, buses. They can contribute financial help to the school for these kind of events. But it goes back to the funding thing. If they can't focus just on one team, because if they do, then the association can come to the boosters and say, well, you're supporting this team too much. You need to have, say it's like boys lacrosse and they don't have girls lacrosse. They're going to be like, well, then you need to balance this out and you need to start a girls lacrosse team so that it's fair for everybody. And I get it. The boosters get excited when they have a particular player. They want to be able to support that player, but that's not the way to do it, because that's going to get them in trouble.
Yeah, and also touching back to your answer from two questions back, you talked about the role that parents play, right? And you said
Mhm.
parents play like a very major role throughout an athlete's journey. A question I had was like, what separates like supportive involvement, like from the parents' perspective, to being like compared to like excessive pressure and that ego that you were talking about?
Yeah, that is something that comes up a lot, especially with parents that never played sports because they don't really understand how it works. I mean, I understand they love their kid, they want them to be successful, but at the same time, you don't want to have a parent that's living vicariously through their child. And maybe, so I sit down with kids sometimes, and we'll do a virtual thing, and I'll talk to the athlete first, and I'll say, okay, what do you like about the sport? How long have you wanted to do this? Where do you see this going down the road? And then I'll say, okay, let me talk to your mom, let me talk to your dad, and I'll talk to the parent about it. And if there's a disconnect there where the kid's not that excited about playing because they're feeling all this pressure from their parents, then that takes the love of the game away from the athlete, and it's a lot of pressure even in the family itself. And so I try to calm everybody down. I've got my youth mental health first aid certification, so I can kind of see, you know are you doing okay? Are you still talking to all the friends you normally had? Are you starting to pull away a little bit? Are you not? Are you hanging out with a different group of friends? Because those are all warning signs that he's, or that player is not feeling as strongly as they should about their particular sport, and they're losing their focus. And the parents, they're not their kid's agent, and a lot of them kind of get that feeling, and they don't intentionally do this, I don't think, but they start to see their student athlete as the golden goose that could end up paying off their mortgage and paying off the cars and all this stuff. And I get it. It's hard not to look at it that way. Diego Pavi, I talk about him a lot. He played at Vanderbilt, and I think he was making $3.5 million in NIL money in college, which just blows my mind. And he was driving a Bentley, I think. It's just crazy. But anyway, his parents, he was giving all his money to his parents. And that's the tricky thing in high school, too, because the athlete is a minor, then the parents are the ones that have to get all this stuff organized. And if they don't have a very good financial literacy on how to handle that, then they could end up messing things up. And people don't realize you can form an LLC, that the parents would have to form an LLC. But attorneys are telling me all the time, they're like, if the student athlete's not making more than $100,000 from these NIL deals, they don't need to set up an LLC. They don't need an agent. They just need to be careful with their money. They would probably need an accountant to make sure they're doing this all correctly. But it's something that is a lot more complicated than people realize. And I think that is one of the main reasons that I got into all this, just to be like, there's so many confusing aspects to it. It's just like, okay, let's all sit down, take a breath, and just kind of walk through. Okay, do you need this? Do you need that? No, you don't need that. Don't worry about that yet. I don't care if Susie down the street has an agent. There's no regulations on agents in high school, by the way. So you can get an agent because you got $100 deal, but some of them can take 20, 30% of that just because they're going to say, oh, I'll get you more deals. It's like, they can't promise that. They don't know. And it gets tricky, but parents have to be more supportive, ask their kids, okay, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? And not push them into, we need to do this, we need to do that. And because it just makes it a really strained family relationship. And it's something that a lot of parents, I mean, it's human nature. You get excited and you start jumping at everything that comes your way. And you just have, honestly, you just need to be the adult in the room and be like, hey, I'm proud of you. I'm excited this is happening for you, but we need to sit down and really think about, what we should do here.
Yeah, I do really like how you touch about the mental and emotional pressure that athletes face all the time, especially from their parents and stuff. And so, what kind of habits would you say can help young athletes build more confidence that goes beyond just like wins and losses of games and where they feel so much pressure to do well?
Well, it goes back to the success is preparation meets opportunity. So you have to train really, really hard physically, obviously, and that's going to give you more playing time, which parents always complain to the coaches about. He's not getting enough playing time. And I like to break that down into objective stats and just be like, okay, well, what are the starters? What are they running? What's their 40 time? What's their vertical and all this kind of stuff? And be like, okay, so what is your athlete running? Well, they're nowhere close to that. Well, they need to work harder to get to that. And that is what's going to justify them getting more playing time. And I totally forgot the question. What was your question?
Yeah, no, I was just like asking like what kind of habits, like what do you recommend for these athletes to do to make sure that their whole life isn't based around if they win or lost the game and how much playing time they get.
Right. And that gets hard because I I remember playing LSU when I was in college, and we were going to win the game. I'd had a great game, and then the very last play of the game, there was a fumble, and LSU ran it back for a touchdown, and we lost. And I was devastated. I was in the locker room. I was bawling. My coach was just like, "Oh, you gave it all out there," and I was like, "Oh." I mean, it was looking back. I'm like, "Wow, why was I so upset about one game?" But I mean, when you train that hard to get to that point and then it doesn't work out, you just get devastated. But that's, I mean, in a weird kind of way, that's good because that means that it actually meant something to you. But I've been on some webinars where they talk about how being an athlete is part of your identity, but it's not all of your identity. So you need to have hobbies away from sports. If you like to draw, you do that. If you have friends that aren't athletes, and that's one good thing because of the academics. I could either in high school I could go to one of the football players' parties on the weekend, or I could go to one of my academic friends' parties, which were totally different. And and it's just being able to expose yourself to different types of people, different types of environments that aren't solely focused on sports. But that's hard too, because as an athlete, you feel like I have to be all in on being an athlete. And you do that and you keep doing that and you just try to block everything out. And you're just like, no, 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 I'm just an athlete. And it's not true. You're a human being and you're not always wanting to shoot a ball or run really fast, or, you need to develop through. And a lot of times I talk about getting involved in church, meditating, anything to kind of keep you centered, to know that, okay, yes, this is a part of me, but it's not all of me. I'm way bigger than just being an athlete.
Yeah, I actually feel like that was really good advice for any athlete or student athlete in that sense. But and now I want to look at it in a different perspective, right? We talked about it like from the student, the parent, and the agent's perspective, but we didn't really touch too much on the coach's side. And so my question for you is, what advice would you give coaches trying to manage like the team culture? And we kind of did talk about this where some athletes receive NIL opportunities and where some do not. Like what should they do in that situation and how do they approach it?
Yeah, coaches, they have a lot of pressure on them because they're trying to let all the kids have playing time just because their parents, they want to win, but they want to make sure they're developing these kids. And when I played, there were probably half the team were just on the team just so they could say they were on the team. They didn't expect to play. But now I feel like with that NIL pressure, they feel like they have to play and be really good and get these deals. But what I tell coaches is to help develop that locker room culture where everybody feels like a family. They need to go to whoever might have an NIL deal and kind of pull them aside and be like, okay, Bobby, you got this NIL deal. I'm proud of you. That's great. But you need to sit down with your teammates, and instead of being like, hey, I'm better than all you guys because I have a deal, you need to be like, hey, I got a deal. Nothing is keeping you guys from getting a deal. So we all need to work really hard so we can bring each other up another level. And that helps to build culture so that you do have that family feel, and not that, I'm better than you. It's like we can all be this level. And I always talk about, it seems like quarterbacks are always the ones that get the most money in NIL deals. And so I'm like, okay, well, say that your quarterback is kind of cocky and thinks he's just the best thing since sliced bread because he has this deal. Well, if his offensive linemen don't have any deals and he's acting that way, well, then what's to keep that offensive lineman for letting the guy get by him so he can smack the quarterback and be like, oh, whoops, sorry. And that's just a way to get back at the quarterback. And you don't want it to be that situation. So the coaches need to make sure they talk to the players that are getting the deals and make sure they're keeping a low profile and telling their players and their teammates that if they can do it, if he can do it, they can do it. And if parents are involved, the biggest thing when I was playing, there was a guy on the team that was really, really good. And in this one playoff game, he wasn't playing. And his dad was about 6'5", 350 pounds. And I look up in the bleachers, his dad is running down the bleachers because his son's not playing, and jumps over the fence, gets in the coach's face. The coach was about 5'6", so this guy was huge. And I was so impressed with the coach. He was just looking up at him, had his hands behind his back, and was just kind of nodding his head and let the guy vent, let the dad scream and yell and just get all crazy. And then he told him real calmly, he said, your son took some cold medicine before the game and he can't breathe, so we don't want him out there. So he actually had the player's best interests at heart, and that's why he wasn't letting him play. And once the dad understood that, then he kind of was embarrassed and he went back and got up in the stands. So you got to deal with parents. They'll get in your face, they'll yell and scream, they'll hijack you on the way out of the game and just be like, what are you doing? My kid's not this, and you did this wrong, and you're terrible. I mean, there are even parents that have gone straight to the school board and gotten coaches in trouble because they're so upset. So that's another thing that I do is I kind of call myself the de-escalator. So I tell the coaches, I'm like, okay, you get a situation like that, there's a lot of emotion going on. Biggest thing is do not meet their level of energy, that emotion when you're talking to them. You need to stop and tell them, hey, this is not the place or the time. Let's sit down tomorrow or next week and we can talk about this. So that gives the parent a chance to kind of calm down. If the parent's not calming down, then they can schedule an appointment with me. And then I go back to that I was saying before with the objective stats and just kind of being like, okay, well, what happened? I understand. And because I'm a third party that is not involved at all as far as specifically, then they can't get mad at me. They can vent to me and that's fine, but I'm not going to get emotional about it. I'm just going to be like, hey, well, here's the facts, blah, blah, blah. That's why they're not getting the playing time. That's why they're not starting. And then they're just kind of like, oh, and I'm like, because I've been there, so I understand what's going on. And a lot of times too, I'll get background on the athlete from the coaches and be like, okay, so give me some feedback about Susie here. What's going on with Susie? And they'll say, well, they're not at all the practices and they're off doing other things. And they missed summer practice because they were off doing a trip to Europe for the French club or whatever. And so when I have that information, when I talk to the parents, I can say, see, this is what's going on. So do they really want to play? And they're like, yeah, but I mean, they really like band or they really like the French club. And it's like, okay, well then that shows they're not as committed as the coach might want them to be. And maybe that's why they're not playing as well. So that is an issue. And that's fine. If they like all that, that's fine. But you can't expect them to be the superstar on the football team or the basketball team or whatever, but then do all these other things too. There has to be some sacrifice because I mean, that's just life. I mean, you want to do one thing, that's great, but you're going to have to sacrifice other things to get to that point where you're really good at one thing. So that's usually what I talk to coaches about.
Yeah, I really liked how you said you have to sacrifice something to achieve what you want, and you should be okay with maybe not achieving that state if you have multiple things going on and kind of just making peace with that. I feel like you
Yeah.
said that beautifully. And as we start to wrap up for our final question, we always do this where we ask like how the field's going to evolve for the next like 10, 15 years. And the question is, as NIL continues to evolve over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, What changes do you expect, and what advice would you leave with every student, athlete, and parent listening today?
In the next 5 to 10 years, NIL in high school changes. It seems like week to week. Every state's different. Every school district can even be different. And it's just the education is the biggest part. You need to be up to date on what the latest things are. I actually talked to a gentleman that believes that, and it is possible that it will also in high school will eventually be like it is in college, where it's an all-encompassing set of rules. All the states understand that, these are the rules. It would make it a lot easier, but it's hard for states to let that go. Like Alabama has some of the most restrictive NIL rules out there, and they're one of the biggest football states there is. So it's like there's not a lot of cooperation with all the states. And so I think it would definitely be a long, long way away for that actually to become a thing. But the biggest thing is you need to just know that, like it or not, NIL is here. It's going to be here tomorrow, because once we, get that toothpaste out of the tube, you're not getting it back in. And so it's already here, and you need to educate yourself every month. You need to make sure, well, not everybody's going to do that, but I have some online resources that say updated rules per state, but it's something that you just need to educate yourself about, and go to the parent meetings, go to the PTA meetings, go to all these meetings, ask your questions, and find out, okay, what can they do? What can't they do? And like I said, if the school administrators don't know for sure, then they should be comfortable saying, well, we'll find out exactly what you're asking, because we don't want to give you bad information. So it's, it is something that I think hopefully will get standardized at some point, but I don't think it's going to be for quite a while.
Dr. John, thank you so much for joining us today. This conversation really brought clarity to one of the biggest changes happening in youth sports. While NIL has created exciting new opportunities, it reminded us that the best decisions come from being informed, thinking long-term, and staying focused on growth rather than simply hype.
And I think one of the biggest lessons from today's episode is that success isn't defined by your first NIL deal or your social media following. It's rather defined by your character, your preparation, and the decisions you make when no one is watching. Whether you're a student athlete, a parent, a coach, an educator, an agent, an athletic director, there's something valuable to take away from this conversation.
Thank you again so much for sharing your experience and for the work you're doing to educate athletes and families across the country. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us here on episode number 24 of Professional Perspectives. We hope you'll join us again for our next conversation as we continue exploring the stories, insights, and perspectives shaping the next generations of leaders. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and keep on exploring your professional perspectives.